sometimes when I get stuck at my life, my like individual life, when I get super overwhelmed of like this very moment, one thing I notice is like I do that because I get stuck in my head of what is happening to me, to my individual life. And what helps me getting through that moment is by acknowledging that I'm just a part of a bigger system. Hi everyone, welcome back to Life Up Education TV. I'm your host Natsune. Today I wanted to talk about physics. Is it? Well, I'm by no means I'm not an expert, but what I like about physics is that sometimes when I get stuck at my life, my like individual life, when I get super overwhelmed of like this very moment, one thing I notice is like I do that because I get stuck in my head of what is happening to me, to my individual life. And what helps me getting through that moment is by acknowledging that I'm just a part of a bigger system and the life goes on whether I'm in it or not. And I'm just a super small part. Like I'm just playing the very, very small part of this earth, of this humanity. And when I noticed that, like I kind of stopped taking my life too seriously and really, get back at this like, okay, well, let's look at this as more logical sense and understand like this, right? Like why this is happening, what this is happening, what does this mean, like everything like that. And yeah, basically really come to the realization that, wow, like whatever I'm suffering right now, like doesn't really matter. So for today's video, I wanted to pick 3 things to talk about, which kind of gives you some sense of that. Okay, so the first one I wanted to talk about is in the span of 63 years, we went from taking a flight, we went from taking a flight to landing on the moon. In the span of 63 years, we went from taking a flight to landing on the moon. Okay. And this is fascinating, right? Because like just about 63 years ago, I don't know how relevant this number is exactly in the exact term, but something like that ago, we only knew how to flight. And then we went from that to landing on the moon. Like that's a super big innovation, like super big movement, progress, right? Progress as a capability of humanity. And I think it makes sense, like as technology evolves, and then we are experiencing it at the rapido pace. Like the things we can do, we are not growing in a constant growth, but we are growing in exponential growth. And it just all makes sense because of the technology. Like always whenever you start something, I think it's a law of, how would you say, is it physics, would you say? It's just a natural law that like when you are building your foundation, your growth might be slower, and once you get to some places, usually things move a lot faster because you already got the foundation right. So it makes sense. Okay, the next one, in the basically like dinosaur era, there was 370 days in a year. Okay, actually let me state the next one as well so that we can kind of talk about these 2 topics together because they're kind of related. Okay, the next one goes, there's no such thing as now as far as physics is concerned. Space and time are fluid, affected by gravity and your speed. Einstein put it like this: for us physicists, the distinction between past, present, and future is only an illusion, however persistent. So basically, this concept is to say time is an illusion that we created. And I think this is a very thought-provoking way to think about time. And like, I mean, who the hell am I to disagree with Einstein, right? Like I completely agree. So basically everything we have in this earth is fake. Like, but fake as in like we made it, right? Like humankind made it so that it makes sense for us, like to have some sort of system, some sort of like formats, rules, like things that make our lives easy. Innovation, right? AKA innovation. But if we really go back to basic, it's kind of mind-blowing to think that time is a concept that we created, right? Like illusion that we created for us to manage it better. So if you really think about it, like we are here, we were born to this world, and basically we are born, and without no definitive time we die. So that's all we have if we go back to basic. So I thought it was kind of interesting, and then basically to give that perspective, even emphasize that perspective more further. This is interesting, like for example, like billions of years ago when there was still dinosaurs, in a year there were not 365 days, they actually had 370 days in a year, because a year is the time that takes for the Earth to move around the sun, right? Okay, the next one is also interesting. I found this TED Talk by a professor, Tom Chi. He's a professor, I think he's a physicist and entrepreneur. And I'm gonna link the TED Talk below on the show notes. It's actually pretty interesting if anybody's interested. But it's pretty long concept, so I needed to kind of like summarize it to get to the point of what I'm trying to talk about. So I'm just gonna like pick some points and introduce the concept of it, or I guess what I took away from it. The first thing I wanted to mention is like, okay, so everything we've been talking about basically suggests that there's no purpose in life, as I preach usually, right? And I believe in that, but that's not because, you know, life is like, oh, like to be cynical about life, like how unmeaningful my life is, like, there's no meaning in life, I should not like even try. Like, no, none of that. My point is like, don't worry too much. Whatever you do, probably 2 generations after you won't even remember who you are, or won't even know what you achieved, because your life impact can reach so far, right? Because we were talking about individual life impact. You can try to make it last by like trying to be famous, but at the very core, like your life impact, individual life impact can last just so far, or can reach just so far. But that being said, there's an interesting concept that I found, and how I can basically tell you why your life actually matters, even if it doesn't feel like that matters much. And once again, like I don't mean to discourage anyone. If anything, I want to encourage you, because your life doesn't matter, so that means that you can do anything you want. So don't be so serious, like try it, go do it, like your life is limited, right? So that's what my behind the message is for saying that. But basically, okay, here's what the story I found. So basically, 3 billion years ago, you could not even breathe in this earth because there was no oxygen, right? And what it actually means was the earth was basically entirely inhospitable, except for the tiniest single-celled organisms. And by single-celled organisms, we are talking about some bacteria. And 3 billion years ago, these bacteria started the process of converting the carbon dioxide into oxygens, right? And these bacteria were so patient, because basically it took them 1 billion years for that oxygens to go build up in the ocean before any of that started actually poking up into the atmosphere. And once 2 billion years have passed of that, finally oxygen was able to begin accumulating in the atmosphere. So about 700 million years ago, something magical happened from the accumulation of oxygen in the atmosphere. Enough oxygen got into the atmosphere that the ozone layer started forming. So about 700 million years ago, right? There was no complex multicellular life before the oxygen layer, and oxygen layer forms, and shortly after, complex multicellular life started to basically show up, right? And 100 million years after that, the first plants got into the land. So the first plants were landed in the earth. So basically, it is started from all this like small bacteria taking the carbon dioxide and then converting them into oxygen, and it took them like a billion years, right? So that's the beginning of life in the earth. And who knew that that very specific organism, like what they were doing, like that action led it to us today, right? Like, in fact, apparently today they are part of the plants, vegetables and stuff like that too. So we probably have ate that bacteria as well inside of us, and then those bacteria help us to breathe still today. So literally, these small tiny organisms created us, led us to who we are today. And when you think about that, it's so crazy, because at that time, I bet these bacteria didn't even think that one day I'm gonna create human, right? Like, it just happened because of everything that happened up until this point, right? And I find it so fascinating, because even if you feel like whatever you're doing in your life right now as a human doesn't feel so important, like billions of years later, whatever you're doing might affect, like the consequence of your life might affect and create completely another creature, or just really have the power to manipulate or create the future of Earth, or the future of where the world is heading, really, right? So I thought it was really powerful and interesting story. And I'm gonna actually list this TED Talk on the show link, so if anyone wants to see the entire thing, which is interesting, so you should, you can check it there. Anyway, thank you very much for watching until the end. I think today's video was a little bit long side, but yeah, thank you very much, and I will see you guys in the next video.